If you're switching to a carnivore diet or even thinking about it, let me save you time and pain by sharing 7 things that I wish I knew before I started. And just a side note, I'm leaving the best for last, so stick around. Hi, I'm Sue. Welcome to the channel. I've been eating a carnivore diet for just about 3 years now, and I can tell you that it's been one hell of a journey. If you want to know more, check out some of my old videos, as I've been pretty open and shared most of my story. Right now, 3 years in, things have really settled down a lot, and the difference in my health from the beginning of 2022 to now is honestly like night and day. The future is bright, and I can't wait to see where I'm at in another 3 years' time. So anyway, I decided today to make a video and share some of the things that I wish I'd known before I started on a carnivore diet, that if I had known them, might have made my journey a little less bumpy. Hopefully, by my sharing my thoughts, it might just help you to avoid or at least be prepared for some of the potential bumps along the way. So here is my number 1. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. When I first started eating a carnivore diet 3 years ago, I quickly found that there were all sorts of opinions, and some of them were very loud, on what the carnivore diet actually is. And those opinions actually made me a little nervous for a while because I was sharing what I was doing online. And some people were very judgmental, but over time I grew some thicker skin and I learned to mostly ignore them. One of the blessings of social media is the ability to block people, just saying. But getting back to the varying definitions of carnivore, some people just eat raw meat, and that kind of grosses me out. I can't even imagine myself doing that. Some do the lion diet, which is just red meat, salt and water. But the majority of carnivores, however, eat some variation of a diet made up of all types of meat, poultry, fish and eggs, maybe some butter, sometimes excluding dairy, while some others include dairy, just depending on what they're trying to achieve and how their bodies respond. And then many do a small amount of low-carb plants in the form of herbs and spices, coffee or tea, or like me, even some fermented veggies like sauerkraut or kimchi. This way of eating, a diet specifically made up of animal foods and ferments, is called a living carnivore diet. It can take a little while to get confident enough to say what you think, but now my personal opinion, 3 years in and after listening to many viewpoints on this, is that if your diet is made up of mostly animal products, mostly meat, then it is some version of a carnivore diet. You're getting most of your nutrition from meat, and if you feel good on it and you're moving towards your goals, then that's what's important. Which brings me to my number 2, and that is, you don't need permission. I get asked all the time, can I eat whatever? Spices, onions, mushrooms, berries on a carnivore diet? The answer to that is do what works for you. You don't need anyone else's permission. If you eat something and it seems to be working for your body and it isn't causing problems and you want to include that in your diet, that's your choice. Because you're all grown up now. No one has the right to tell you what to put into your body. But you might find that in carnivore groups, there's some weirdness when it comes to certain things, and they don't make sense. One is that a lot of carnivores will add onion powder or dried herbs or garlic powder to their meat without batting an eyelid. But put up a photo of your steak with some onion rings or avocado, and oh boy, some people get their knickers in a knot. And then the other thing is coffee. Coffee is a bean, but for some reason, it's fine on carnivore. Even with those who are really strict and will tell you, no plants allowed. Don't worry, it's the addiction that's affecting their thinking. Coffee has somehow been accepted as the one special token plant that's allowed in the carnivore diet. And again, if you choose to drink it, then that's entirely up to you. But if you don't and choose instead to drink herbal tea, don't let anyone tell you that it's not allowed. So the message here is just to experiment over time and trust your own results. Nothing has to be permanent or set in stone. You can make changes based on your personal goals and your personal needs and your body. And if you want to eat a little avocado or some onion rings from time to time and call it carnivore, then that's entirely up to you. You can always make an agreement with anyone who calls you out for what you choose to add to your version of the carnivore diet to swap out whatever it is that you're eating for the coffee. Like, I'll have this instead of this. Don't panic, I'm kidding. Let's get to number 3. Our carnivore journeys will vary. We are all different. We each come to the carnivore lifestyle with a body that is almost always in some way damaged by our food and lifestyle choices of the past. But some of us are more damaged than others, and so our bodies react in different ways to our change in diet. In my case, I started on carnivore, and a couple of weeks in, the IBS diarrhea that had plagued me for decades got way worse. Did I expect that to happen? No, and the hard part was that it stayed worse for a very long time, and I didn't even lose loads of weight to make up for it. Instead, I had huge histamine intolerance issues. I got covered in a rash and I had panic attacks. I was still fat, spotty, itchy, and anxious, and other carnivores couldn't figure out why I was struggling so much and assumed that I was doing it wrong. But it was just that my body was in more trouble when I started than most are, and it's taken more experimentation, more learning, and more work to undo the damage that was there. In fact, I had stopped all my supplements as well as all my plants when I started carnivore because I wanted to do it right. I'm a little bit OCD and tend to take things very seriously and literally, but I quickly found that didn't work for me. Many people start on carnivore and start dropping weight really quickly. Their health turns around fast, and while they might have a week or 2 of diarrhea, and not everyone does, everything just seems to work out for them, kind of like a fairy tale, and it really doesn't seem fair. That happened with a friend of mine recently who thought that I was nuts for over 2 years when I first started eating this way. She eventually decided to try it in desperation to lose weight that she had gained during menopause. She did it, not even properly, for a few months and dropped a whopping 14 kilos. Yes, I'm rolling my eyes. You caught me. But not everyone has that experience. And if that's you, just know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel eventually. Me, personally, my light is still beckoning and that tunnel is frigging long. And that brings me to number 4. Those of us who try to look after our bodies often seem to have the hardest time. Now, this obviously isn't always the case, but I've come to the conclusion that many of those who have lived their lives eating a standard junk-filled diet, like my friend who dropped the 14 kilos in a few months, and who have never really bothered to take care of their bodies before, actually have an easier time transitioning to a carnivore diet. Unless they're seriously morbidly obese or chronically ill, that's a little bit different. But the average person eating a standard diet made up of ultra-processed junk food who's maybe 30 or 40 or even 80 pounds overweight, maybe even pre-diabetic or diabetic, they often seem to have an easy time when they start on carnivore. These are the people that seem to instantly thrive on a carnivore diet and drop weight easily. It seems to me that even though they've been eating a diet filled with junk food and were on a path of self-destruction prior to carnivore, the damage to their bodies is maybe less than those of us who have been more health conscious and who have eaten a healthy, clean, plant-heavy diet for years. I honestly think that many of us who have tried to take care of our bodies with all the plant-based health food, superfood nonsense and oxalate heavy meals have been conned into really damaging ourselves over time. It seems from my own experience and that of others that I chat to online that the damage done by plant toxins, oxalate being the most insidious, takes longer to heal and to clear from our bodies. It can really put us through some misery and it can take years to undo the damage, but it does get better. And so let's talk about my number 5, which is, if you're different, it can be hard to find help. Because many people, at least those who are vocal online, have a similar, reasonably easy journey on carnivore. There seems to be just the same kind of standard problems and solutions to those problems that work for a lot of people. There are things like electrolyte issues, a bit of diarrhea or constipation during the adaptation phase, or weight loss plateaus. The problems are really common, and a choice of some fairly standard answers generally resolves these issues for a lot of people. The most challenging among these seems to be weight loss for many women. And so when I first started on my carnivore journey, I joined a group led by a very prominent carnivore influencer. The group was great. It was well set up and I enjoyed my time as a member. but they couldn't help me with the problems I was having. And so after a couple of months, I left because I found that I couldn't participate in their program. I had so much going on with my gut and my bowel that it seemed like no one understood what was happening to me and no one could help me. I remember when I quit that group, I felt quite despondent. I really honestly didn't know where to turn, and I didn't have the financial resources to pay thousands of dollars for professional help, so I had to continue muddling through on my own. The benefits I'd experienced from this way of eating kept me here, but the problems I was having were really challenging. And the frustrating thing was that the advice that I was getting was just the standard stuff for standard problems, with answers like don't eat rendered fat or don't eat aged foods. That standard advice that helped most people just didn't make any difference for me. Luckily, I'm pretty good at finding information and putting pieces together. That's one of my strong points. And so gradually, bit by bit, I figured out what was going on with me, and I'll talk more on that shortly. So next we have number 6, and this is something that I wish I knew more about, oxalate dumping, and the fact that oxalate dumping can get pretty wild. This is a big one. I wish I'd known more about oxalate before I started on carnivore. In fact, I knew a little bit about it, but all I knew was that I had a condition called vulvodynia and that it was caused by oxalate, and I knew that when I ate beetroot it brought it on. That was about it. I really had no idea about anything else to do with oxalate, but boy, have I learned a lot about it now. If I'd known more, I might have gradually lowered my oxalate intake instead of jumping straight into carnivore. Or I might not have. I tend to be all or nothing. But I know now that doing that would have been wise, and if I'd really known what I was in for, I definitely would have considered going more slowly. I didn't realise at first that the really bad diarrhea that came on about 2 weeks into my carnivore journey and didn't quit for months was at least in part due to oxalate dumping and increased histamine intolerance due to the effects the oxalate was having on my gut. It was only after reading Sally Norton's book and listening to a lot of videos that I realised that the hot, burning, sandy diarrhea was being caused by my body dumping huge amounts of oxalate via my bowel. And I had no idea when I started that oxalate crystals could come out of my breasts en masse over a couple of days and not make a mark on my skin. That was really wild. And I had no idea that oxalate can cause various cancers, breast cancer being one of them. If you are new to carnivore or thinking about it and you've come from a high oxalate diet, and in particular if you have had long-standing gut issues, and even worse, mold issues, be prepared for problems caused by oxalate dumping. If you're lucky, you might not be too affected, but if you are, it can take some time to get a handle on it, to recognize the signs in your body. Oxalate dumping can cause gut issues, diarrhea, bladder issues, electrolyte problems, kidney stones, joint pain, muscle pain, neurological issues, skin problems, depression, gritty eyes, and it can really create confusion when there's multiple things going on in your body. Oxalate really is the gift from all those plants that you ate that just keeps on giving. Oxalate dumping is a whole body kind of experience that can come and go for years. And as depressing as all that sounds, just know that every time your body starts dumping, a bit more is gone, never to return. And it does get better. It also helps to be aware that keeping a little oxalate in your diet can help to reduce the dumping, although it didn't seem to do much for me in the beginning. I think my body was just hell-bent on getting rid of as much oxalate as quickly as possible. But usually it doesn't need to be too much. A couple of squares of dark chocolate or a cup of strong tea each day will often do it. It won't stop it, but it will reduce it. I now use a teaspoon of slippery elm powder in water each day. Slippery elm is a herb, the bark of a tree, and it contains high amounts of oxalate, but it's also really good for reducing inflammation in the gut, and it seems to work well for me. And I know that someone at this point is going to ask where I get it from, so I'll pop a link below the video. Now, some people don't want to consume anything with oxalate because they're worried about it being stored in their body. But if you keep the intake low, under 50 milligrams a day, your body isn't going to store it. This is just about keeping a tiny bit in the bloodstream so that your body recognizes that there's still some coming in. And hopefully it slows down the dumping process and makes it more manageable. And finally, my number 7, which is gut health can be complicated. As I said earlier, my gut health was way more complicated than I thought. After watching others who have had their gut issues resolve quickly on a carnivore diet, even those with really serious problems like Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease, I had hoped that mine would be the same. I didn't have a diagnosis for what was going on with me because I'd stopped seeing doctors years ago. But I always just assumed it was IBS and that leaky gut was the problem. And I was wrong. What I now know is that although I no doubt had a leaky gut, and I had done for years, there were a few other things that were going on in my digestive system that I just wasn't aware of. And they were probably due to my decades of eating massive amounts of oxalate on my highly plant-based diet, eating a generally low-fat diet, not eating much in the way of animal foods, years of over-exercising, chronic stress, past traumas, and alcohol consumption. Over the 3 years that I've been eating this way, I've come to realise that not only was oxalate dumping and histamine intolerance contributing to the crazy diarrhea that I was experiencing, but my gallbladder wasn't working well at all, and I've learned that the whitish coloured poop that I often used to see in the toilet was because there was no bile. I'd gone through phases of seeing that off and on for years, and I actually used to have all sorts of poop colours. I'm sorry if that's too much information. I also came to the conclusion that I had SIBO and mould that had taken up residence in my digestive system. It was when I addressed SIBO that I began to feel like I had turned a corner. But then there was evidence of a lack of stomach acid and probably a lack of digestive enzymes as well. So I've done a lot of things to heal my gut over the last 3 years, apart from eating a carnivore diet, which is the foundation that underpins everything else. I've also made a lot of mistakes and I've caused myself some misery at times. But I think now that most of the mistakes I made were in the timing and the sequence in which I was trying things. I was finding the right information, but not in the ideal order. I was mostly doing the right things and using the right supplements, but I didn't really have the understanding for what I should address first, or second, or third. I was desperate, and so I was trying to resolve what was going on and grabbing at anything that looked like it might help. Thankfully, I've learned a lot, and I understand more now about how it all works. But honestly, I could have saved myself some time and money and stress if I'd had more of an idea on how I should have addressed my digestive issues right from the beginning. But hey, as long as we get there in the end, right? And I'm actually in the process of creating some free information on what I've learned from my own experience with my gut issues when I have the time. And so if that's something you think might be helpful for you, visit the link below to sign up for my newsletter and I'll keep you posted. And so that's my 7 things I wish I'd known before I started on the carnivore diet. How about you? Do you have any? If you have something that you wish you knew before starting, drop it in the comments below. And if you have any questions or suggestions, drop them below as well. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, like and share. I thank you very much for watching and I will talk to you again another day. Goodbye for now.